Our next speaker is from Los Angeles, California. He comes from a background of an engineer. Then from that field of science, moved to field of real estate, became a real estate broker, and field of science of buying and selling homes. Did a little bit of the Richard Diamond style, by the way. And then he was attacked viciously and wrongfully by the most aggressive and lawless and arbitrary income tax agency in America. No, that's not the IRS. Nope, it's not the IRS. They're lambs compared to the California Franchise Tax Board, or FTB. They are far more aggressive and lawless than the IRS. They make like IRS look like guys that follow the law on a regular basis. So, and it's true. I get literally I get from California people. I get 10 calls from FTB attacking or harassing people for every one IRS case I get from IRS attacking Californians. So that's how vicious these guys are, and they're way out of control. Way out of control. And we've been working at him to reining him in. And well, this person did exactly that. He will share with you how he reined in this monster. And one, not only they removed the 2 tax liens they had illegally placed on him, and they zeroed out his accounts, but he won over $330,000 jury judgment against the FTB. He's going to tell you about that. He's going to tell you about his upcoming lawsuit, okay, and where to take it from here to restore honest government by having these governmental agencies follow the law and enforce the law on them. And I have the pleasure of having worked with this person because he's my teacher and I'm his student. And he's also my student. He attended Freedom Law School. We learn and study together. And also there's a lot to be said about collaboration, how we can and should work together to restore justice. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce to you Mr. Paul Ballmer.
How long? 40 minutes. Okay. Thank you, Payman. Before I get started, try to loosen things up a little bit. And how many of you have a relationship with the Franchise Tax Board? How many of you have friends there? How many of you know a guy by the name of Roger Lubians? Go Roger! And how many of you know Steve Hempling at the Free Enterprise Society? Well, Steve and Free Enterprise Society were the ones that actually got me started down this road when the Franchise Tax Board was coming after him. But I have to tell you a little personal story about Roger Lubians and Steve. It seems that Roger had a day off and he was out hunting, and he was wandering around in Fresno County and he shot a duck, and it happened to come down on Steve's property. Steve has a little property up there, and maybe a lot, I don't know exactly, but anyway, it came down on his property, and so Steve saw this and he ran out there and he grabbed the duck, and he was carrying the duck home, and lo and behold, Roger shows up and he says, "Hey, mister, that's my duck. I just shot it." And Steve looked at him and said, "Well, no, it's on my property. It's mine." And so they started going after it pretty good. And finally Steve said, "Well, look, this is Fresno County, and in Fresno County we do things differently. So in order to decide who gets the duck, here's what we do." And so one of us hits the other one as hard as they can 3 times, and then the other one gets his turn. And then whoever's left standing, well, they get the duck. So Steve said, "Okay, I'll go first." So Roger stands up and Steve gives him a big foot right in the groin. Roger doubles over and rolls down on the ground, and Steve runs up and kicks him in the gut, and he has one more swat, so he kicks him in the head, And finally, Roger stumbles to his feet and gets up, and he's kind of staggering around a little bit, and he says, "Okay, it's my turn." And Steve looks at him and says, "Ah, shucks, you get the duck."
A wise man is one who knows when he has enough.
Right. Well, I have some good news and some bad news for you today. So first I can tell you about the good news. And good news is that in 2001, after 8 years, in March of 2001, I received a jury verdict of 12-0 against the Franchise Tax Board for damages. And they filed a notice of appeal, and then in July they withdrew that appeal, and they sent me the check for a little over $330,000. $250,000 of that was in damages for emotional distress. I had no compensatory damages, which I was entitled to, but I had none. I claimed none, but the jury awarded the $250,000 for emotional damages, and the rest was in attorney's fees and charges and so on. There were 2 trials. There was an appeal, about 10 or 15 appearances for motions, mediation, status conferences, and at one point they offered me $1,000 to settle. I immediately declined, and then later on they offered me $20,000. I had actually offered to settle the case for $370,000. So, but you know, they walked away from that because they figured that they were probably going to win in court. One thing that I want to stress is that mine was not a tax case, but it solved a tax problem. In California, we have the California Privacy Act, which is in the Civil Code. It starts at 1798, and basically the Civil Code sets up conditions that control the kind of information that any agency in California can maintain in their files, and how the kinds of notices that they have to send out, and who they can give that information to. Well, they've stopped doing it, but they used to send out a privacy notice with the return, and it's also in some of the booklets. That privacy notice is governed by the what I'm going to refer to as the IPA, the Information Practices Act, and this act is supposed to give you access to your files. They're supposed to maintain the source of the information in their files, and you're supposed to have the ability to correct the information in your files. Now that sounds pretty straightforward and simple, right? In the IPA was enacted in 1977, almost 25 years ago. But until my case, at least to my knowledge, it has eluded the Patriot movement all of this time. In other words, I could find no appellate cases, no references whatsoever where there had been a previous suit. There may have been some other suits, but if there were, why the FTB was able to quelch those, and they certainly didn't let them get to appeal. And remember, I mentioned that they did file an appeal in my case. Actually, we went to appeal one time after the first trial. We won that appeal, but we did not ask for, because of time and money, we did not get a published decision. So, and then the second time with the 12-0 verdict, they obviously elected not to go and try to get an appeal. The IPA is very simple. It's very clearly written. It's a very simple administrative process. In other words, you write to them, you ask them what the source is, you ask them, you know, if you find out information that's in your file, et cetera, and then you just ask them to correct it, and they should do that, right? Wrong. It applies to all agencies in California, and it also provides for the ability to sue them and to receive, as I mentioned before, both compensatory and emotional distress damages. and also attorney's fees. Now, what they have done, and what they've been doing for quite a few years, is they've implemented what's called the Personal Income Tax Non-Filer Enforcement Program. And what they do in this situation is that they basically, if you're a non-filer or have any kinds of problems, or if you object on any way, then they start generating a return. Well, they don't generate a return, they just generate numbers for you. Basically, anyone who has a license, and there are about 50 or 60 licenses in California, anyone who has a business or self-employed, where they can make an estimate of the kind of business that you're in. If you make mortgage payments, they will multiply your mortgage times 4. And if you have property sales, they'll take 50% of the value of the property. Now, what the Information Practices Act, one of the key statutes in the Information Practices Act for me was the fact that in 1798-14, it says that they can only maintain personal information in their files, in my files, personal information which is relevant and accurate when it pertains to me. Well, starting in about 1992, I started asking some questions and writing what's called an Information Practices Act request. And because what they were doing, they were generating these figures, and I couldn't figure out where they were getting them from. In other words, they said, you know, here's a proposed assessment, you have this much income, and so on and so on. And over the years, I learned how to write the letters and how to ask the questions, because what they were doing was that they were taking based upon my broker's license, they were taking the average income for real estate brokers in Los Angeles County, and they were planting that in my file, and then coming back and saying, okay, that's how much income that you made. All right. Now, obviously, you can You can appeal a notice of proposed assessment. However, I think it's important to understand what the objective of the Franchise Tax Board is, or what their goal is. Okay, and their goal is to force you to surrender at any cost, to capitulate, to get back into the system. And you know, you think we only pay, people only pay 10% state income tax now. Well, if you're back in the system, guess what? They can charge you literally anything that they want. In other words, they'll go to the legislature, they'll increase the tax rate. So once you're in the system, then Katie bar the door, and they can take literally everything that you have, or that anybody in California has. So in my case, they planted this information in the file, and obviously what a real estate broker or any license, in other words, a chiropractor, an attorney, an accountant, anybody, and there are about 50 or 60 licenses in California, that information is not personal. So I wrote them a letter, and in the IPA, there's a provision where you can write them a letter and ask them to amend your file. In other words, get rid of the non-personal or other than personal information in your file. Well, think about it. If that information, in other words, this is a prerequisite to the tax code. So if the non-personal information is taken out of your file, then the assessment goes, the lien goes, the levy goes. They have nothing, okay? Well, they didn't. They said that they wouldn't amend the files, and then I wrote a second letter to Kathleen Connell, which is provided for in the code. She said that actually she didn't respond at all. She asked Taxpayer Advocate Office to respond. That's a joke. And so finally, after 4 years of writing letters, think about this. One simple statute which says you can only have personal information in the file. And 4 years later, after writing letters, they still had not amended that file, okay? And they refused to do that. So my only choice at that point was to file a lawsuit, which I did. I thought it'd be pretty simple. You know, I'd draft a complaint. I'd get the attorney to put his name on the complaint, and you know, there'd be maybe a simple trial or hearing, and it'd all be over with. Well, little did I know. Obviously, I was very naive at what these people have the capabilities of doing. One of the reasons that I decided to work with an attorney, and there are many, or quite a number, but the fact that the IPA provides for attorney's fees. The R&T code, it's not that clear. In other words, it's a lot more difficult to get attorney's fees under the R&T code, and I didn't want to be in the R&T code, okay? I wanted to be separate from that because this was a separate procedure. So anyway, I mentioned then, they filed a demur, they filed these motions, it went on and on and on, and 4 years later, we finally got the judgment. Now what they're, well, again, I'm working with quite a few other people now, and some of these people only have W-2s and 1099s. Some of them have self-employment income. Some of them have other licenses. Some of them have, now what they're doing is they're taking my mortgage payment and multiplying it by 4. Well, guess what? Is 4 personal to me? Where do you get the 4? In other words, they're supposed to provide the source of the information which they have in my file. Well, they use all these techniques. In other words, they say it's computer generated. Well, who sent this file out? It's computer generated. In other words, you have to learn what questions to ask and how to get the information, because what you really need to know is who's in charge of the computer. In other words, who's making the decisions that's sending out that information. Let me just tell you a couple of other of the reasons why I decided to work with an attorney and how that actually paid off. One of the most difficult things in any tax-related, and I say, on the one hand, this was not tax-related, but obviously it has a bearing on the taxes. And one of the most difficult things that I see that happens both in IRS cases and in franchise tax board cases is that a pro se gets blown out of court, and even attorneys oftentimes, they can't keep the case in court. I've been involved in a number of IRS suits, and it's very difficult to keep the case in court. They file demurs and motions, and you have to be able to do that. And another situation was when we were selecting the jury. That turned out to be a real valuable asset. Evidence. I mean, there are just so many issues, and procedurally, think about it. I mean, they have, offices and offices of attorneys. They've been doing this for 10, 20, 30 years. I mean, all these people have been involved, in this with the state for practically their whole lifetime, and they have all this experience. They have unlimited money, unlimited funds, unlimited time, and so they can throw quite a bit at you, and plus you have to be very careful because generally the courts are on their side also, because the courts are getting paid by them. So procedurally is where they often get you, in other words, and it's important. In other words, oftentimes someone will come to me and they'll say, well, the law is such and such, or we can do this and this, such and such. Well, the problem is that you never get to litigate that in the court. The first time around, we only had a bench trial, and that only lasted about 20 minutes. And I'll give you a little story as to why the courts, or that demonstrates how the courts are against you. We went into court for the trial, and Derek stood up to give that's my attorney, Derek Taboni. He stood up to give the opening statement, and he said something like, I'll not take a lot of the court's time because it's a very simple, relatively simple case. It's all, broken down, and it's summarized in the pleadings. The judge says, oh no, counsel, I want you to make a very detailed opening statement. Now, why would he ask the counsel to make a detailed opening statement? Next thing he did was before we even started the trial, he said, I want each of the counsels to ante up, I think it was $125 each, for the transcript. What the heck do you need a transcript for? We're going to have a trial. We don't even know how the trial is going to come out. Well, it didn't dawn on me till later because too many things were happening too fast. And anyway, so he gave a very detailed opening statement, about 20 minutes or thereabouts, and the Attorney General stood up to give his opening statement, and the judge said something like, counsel, I don't see any legal issues here. Do I hear a motion for non-suit? And the Attorney General, he was kind of out of it, and he just kept right on talking. And finally the judge said, "Counsel, I don't see any legal issues here. Do I hear, oh, motion for non-suit, motion for non-suit. Case dismissed." And we were out of there. So think about it. The judge was afraid to hear this lawsuit. So he asked for, he knew that it was going to go to appeal, so he asked for the money up front to make sure that the transcript would get paid, and he wanted to make sure that everything got on the record, okay? So you see how they work in concert, and if you just go in and all of a sudden you think you're going to go, you're going to go to trial, and it's like less than a cup of coffee and you're out of there. So this is an example of how the courts work with the taxing agencies. Another thing that helped us greatly was I had, I sued them for 91, 2, and 3, and at least one of those years, maybe two, I had, and that's really a joke also because they're supposed to have, they claim to be the hearing officer. Technically, there should be an auditor there. In other words, who's representing the franchise tax board? Typically, in an administrative hearing, you should have a third party that's neutral. Well, they're judge and jury, and they do everything. They just basically say, unless you can show me some information which shows that you didn't have this much income, whatever. Well, where'd you get that figure? Well, I don't know. I just got it from Sacramento. Well, where's the file? Well, I don't have the file. Well, this is all they sent me, this one page, okay? Well, I have it documented where Kimberly Gardner worked on my file for months before, okay? So they kick out the NPA hearing, but in that I had the transcript, and we were able to get that into the court for the trial, and the court and the jury read that, and that was very beneficial because they commented afterwards they could not believe the arrogance of Kimberly Gardner during this hearing. And I probably have a dozen of those transcripts from either myself or other people that have been in similar hearings. So we learned a lot from that case, and it was obviously very gratifying to get the award and be able to pay off a lot of money which I owed. And so I figured, well, I've been successful in opening the door a little bit, but this is a long, long way from the battle or the war. And what we need to do is open the door a little wider. And I don't have the wherewithal or the money and time in order to make a full assault on the franchise tax board. So what I'll do is I'll find some other people that would like to file another lawsuit, because by that time they were coming after me. Even before the trial was over, they were coming after me for 1998 and 1997 and 1998 for my mortgage payment, okay? And they were multiplying it by 4, and I'd been to the NPA hearings and same old garbage and so on. And so I figured, well, what we tried, the reason that I wanted to include other people in a second lawsuit was because at the first lawsuit, one of the things that I tried to do was to bring other people into the court as witnesses, as these are flagrant practices which the IPA or which the Franchise Tax Board is perpetrating on everybody in the community. And I had 3 people, actually Payman was one of them. He was the first to get up on the stand. They asked Derek asked him a couple questions. They objected, Attorney General objected, and they said irrelevant, and so none of those people were able to testify. So the question then becomes, how do you get this testimony into court, before the jury? And that's how I came up with the idea. Well, I will hopefully find a couple of other people that have similar, because I knew there were literally hundreds, thousands. I mean, when you read the PIT, the Personal Information Enforcement Program, and which I have copies of, I estimate in 1997 they probably literally stole someplace around between $1 and $2 billion from the people of California. Probably there's 100 to 200,000 people that they're going after. So this was the reason that I wanted to add other people to go into court. And so I found two people. One guy had been writing IPA letters since the cases, the year goes back to 1980. They came and took his car. They took money out of his bank account. He's been writing IPA letters since the early 90s. I've been working with him for over a year. Another guy who has a situation where they fabricated a business, and we've been working. In an IPA lawsuit, one of the things that you have to do, ideally, is you have to develop the violations. In other words, there's basically two processes going on. There's a process where they send you where's your return, an assessment, a lien, all those notices and everything, and typically, you try and answer those. And then there's the other process under the Information Practices Act, which allows you to interrogate the agency, in this case the Franchise Tax Board, and find out, well, where did you get the source, why is this, or what is the personal information, et cetera, all these questions. So both of these processes are going on at the same time, and typically it takes, well, I had spent 4 years doing that, but I figured that we could compress that down to about six to maybe 10, 12 months, and so that's why. Plus, these files were considerably more involved than even mine, at least Brent Fisher's is, and so we've been working on that, and one of the things that we wanted to do, I wanted to bring in the Board of Equalization, and because they are rubber stamp Gestapo also. And Richard Parisi, one of the other people I'm working with, had filed a zero return, and lo and behold, the the Board of Equalization accepted his appeal. Typically, they will kick out the appeal because they say it's dismissed because you didn't file a return. Hopefully, we're going to be able to litigate that issue. But anyway, they had accepted his appeal, and I knew what would happen, but I wanted to get the experience of how the Board of Equalization would handle the IPA. We had the appeal hearing. They virtually just shut me down. Every time I'd mention the IPA or any of the violations, they just move on. Frivolous penalty. Everybody else files. Parisi didn't file, or at least didn't file a valid return. So over with. Then we filed for a rehearing, and obviously got denied on that. Just another subtle example of what they do in the process of the rehearing. As I read the rules and the regulations, all Parisi would have to do is file for the rehearing. It files a brief, and that's all that's required. Well, the Board of Equalization gives the Franchise Tax Board the right to file an answer, basically an answer brief. There's nothing in the code or in the rules which say that. So when I found out about that and I got the Franchise Tax Board's brief for the rehearing, I said, well, hey, we want to file an answer to their brief. Well, no, you can't do that. It's closed. And then I, showed them, wrote them a letter and showed them where there was not even any requirement for the Franchise Tax Board to file an opposing brief. And if you're going to let that brief in, then you better let our brief in. Okay, we'll let your brief in. So see, when I was able to call their bluff, they capitulated. But that doesn't happen very often. Anyway, they still denied the rehearing. But we're debating whether we're going to hopefully include the Board of Equalization and some of those issues, because it's pervasive as well. So we're right on the verge of working on. That was the reason. The reason we a lot of this time, and also there's what's possibly a tort claim requirement, which takes 6 months. So we've been working on all these things, and lo and behold, in I guess it's about the middle of September, Paymon gives me a call and says, "Guess what, Paul? I just got a call from one of our members in Sacramento, and the state legislature." Oh, here comes the bad news. The state legislature passed a law to prohibit the use of the IPA. Okay, so I get on the net, I pull up the law, and that law, and do a little phone calling and so on. It was signed, passed in August. It was signed by Davis in September, and it goes into effect January 1st. And basically what it says, it exempts the Franchise Tax Board from having to deal with the IPA. It says that you cannot ask to amend your files. It says that you cannot ask Heõll to review that request. You cannot file a lawsuit. Now think about what this does. This will allow the Franchise Tax Board to even expand their personal income tax non-filer enforcement program to, you remember what I said? If they take 10% and you're in the system, now they can take 100. Well, they can do anything they want, and you can't do anything about it. Because when I say you can't do anything about it, the only recourse you have is to pay the tax and file a lawsuit under the Revenue and Taxation Code, which is much, much more difficult. So, and they say that that's your remedy. Well, people do not have the money, they don't have the time, they don't have the expertise or the knowledge to file a lawsuit many times under the IPA, let alone under the Revenue and Taxation Code. So now what the Franchise Tax Board, and I'm convinced, I don't have the documentation yet, but I'm convinced that the Franchise Tax Board and or the BOE went to Senator Bowen and convinced her that, hey, people were getting out of assessment. In other words, they made it a tax issue. They always make it a tax issue. They never, legitimized it and said, well, the Franchise Tax Board is abusing the IPA right and left, and we need to leave that in there so that they don't abuse it anymore. Well, Katie barred the door. That's what they did. So what this did was, because it goes into effect the 1st of January, I said, well, number one, my case that I'm working on with Fisher and Parisi, we have to file that by this next weekend because of the tort claims. But then I had been working with a number of other people, and I called them all up or emailed them, and I said, hey, if you want to file this lawsuit, we have 2 requirements that we have to get in place before actually 3, before the 1st of January. One is we have to request them to amend your files. Then we have to wait 30 days after they receive it. Then we file a request for Heõll to do the correction, and then we have to get the complaint filed by the 1st of January. So I have a fair number of people. I know Payman has some people, and we just basically took whatever information they had. In some cases, we took no information and just said, hey, whatever you got that's non-personal to me, whatever you got that's in violation of the IPA, we want you to delete that from my file. In other words, we want to get that on the record, and we want to get some kind of filing done before the 1st of January. So in these cases, we haven't had the time. Now, we may be able to do that in discovery, or we may be able to do some of it after the first of the after the 1st of the year. But I just wanted to, and see, one of the things that we're trying to do is to expand from the non-personal issues to the other issues in the IPA. For example, the privacy notice. If you go home and read your privacy notice and read it in detail, get out the IPA and read what the requirements are, they don't meet any of those requirements, okay? And especially their authority. They never tell you what their authority is to ask you for a return or to establish your tax liability, okay? Think about that. Somebody sitting in Sacramento who doesn't, this is another very important issue, okay? When you read the tax code, the Franchise Tax Board has the authority to do certain things, to even file a return for you. And Gerald Goldberg has been appointed as executive director, and essentially all of these responsibilities have been delegated to him. But I maintain that he has not redelegated any authority to, in fact, I have an IPA which says that there's no documentation that he has redelegated any of that authority to any other agent, employee, officer, deputy, or whatever. So this means that the individual, now the Franchise Tax Board may have the authority, but that authority has not been redelegated to the individual, okay? One example of that is that I was looking at one of the transcripts last night where Kimberly Gardner was the so-called hearing officer, and Richard Parisi walked in and said, I'll pay this, okay? I think it wasn't much. It was like $500. It was for a frivolous penalty. He said, I will pay this, Miss Gardner, if you will just sign this statement that this is my tax liability and this is what I owe. You know what? She wouldn't sign. She said, you can go out to the window and they'll tell you how much you owe and they'll take your check, but I won't sign it. Then, and she says that she doesn't make the determination, okay? She sends it to Sacramento and somebody in Sacramento makes the determination. She walks out of the room and writes out a letter which is mailed, you know, an hour after the hearing, and says that, you know, your assessment is affirmed, but she doesn't sign it, okay? I looked at four of those letters last night. She doesn't sign it. Now, guess what? If she had the authority, wouldn't you think that she would have signed it? One of the things that we're doing in our cases is that we have submitted a letter offering to pay whatever we owe. No questions asked, okay? We will pay, you know, whatever you say we owe, we'll pay, okay? All you have to do is send us a verified statement signed under penalty of perjury that, yes, this is the tax liability that this person owes to the penny. I have personal knowledge of that. And sign it under penalty of perjury. Well, guess what? They don't answer that. They either don't answer that or they send you some unsigned garbage that doesn't pertain to that. So this is what we're working on. These are some of the key issues. If, unfortunately, you know, you're not going to be able to use the IPA after the 1st of January unless we find another loophole. But I think as a movement, so to speak, what we have to do is we have to find some collateral attacks. I mean, ways to collateral attack the situation, because from my perspective, the Revenue and Taxation Code is just too difficult. What are some of these? Well, I haven't researched these, but I just have inklings. I have files on some of these, but the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act, possibly they violate that. I know that the recording laws are violated, possibly administrative law, UCC. These are just some of the areas that we need to look at. In other words, who is the creditor? Who is the debtor? Do they have a valid, what does it take to have a claim, etc.? These are some of the things that we need to look at in going forward. So that's the good news and the bad news. But you know, when you get knocked down, takes a little wind out of your sails, but I've learned over the years that you just have to take a big breath and come back fighting. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Paul. Well, it's my pleasure to introduce a person whom you have seen before. Is it on? Okay, there we go. That you've seen before, someone that I've known for a number of years, and I'm constantly impressed with his depth and his personality and his ability to put on an outstanding event year after year. That would be none other than Paymon.
Thank you for that introduction. I want to add to what Paul Ballmer said earlier about the lawsuit with IPA using California's Information Practices Act, that we're filing at least two joint lawsuits against the FTB. Myself with 6 of our students, and Paul's been working with 2 individuals very intensely, and also 6 other individuals also. So it's going to be a lawsuit where he'll be filing, you know, like 10 plaintiffs against the Franchise Tax Board, and myself with 6 others, 7 of us filing a multiple lawsuit, which will be in the millions of dollars. It's going to be a big lawsuit that we're doing because they have an illegal program. In fact, at the back, April can show you a copy of they have a filing enforcement program that FTB has, which is absolutely operating in violation of the law and the Constitution and the California laws. Well, yesterday you heard me speak about how the IRS is truly a Wizard of Oz. And today I'm going to share with you more about what to do about the Wizard of Oz. I don't have as much time as I would like to have, of course, on the subject, and naturally you're going to have a lot more good questions which I would not be able to address fully this morning, but I'm going to try to give you at least as much of a good skeleton meat and potatoes of it as I can with the time, and I'm going to show you the source where you can get more information, more of your questions answered in more detail as you deserve to have, of course. First of all, I'm going to bring it to attention. You remember that you guys have the material from yesterday? The flyer, there was a flyer with the Commission of Internal Revenue. Remember? I'm going to summarize a little bit from yesterday, a couple of key points. The whole system of the income tax is based upon bluff, number one. It's based upon force, too, yes. But bluff is number one. The fact is the system is based upon suckering each individual to, on his own, give the information to the IRS. That's the number one thing they need from you, is that information that you swear to under oath to be true, correct, and complete, and put the rope around your neck, and you put the burden of proof on yourself to prove everything you claim with canceled checks and receipts and further statements under oath, right? Without you doing that, they really are up the creek with little paddle, okay? Because the fact that they simply do not have the resources to go after such large numbers of people. The amount of tax returns filed by individuals is approximately 90 million. The non-filers, according to the IRS, back in 1996 was about 63 million. So today, you know it's got to be closer to 70 million, if not more, and nobody knows the real number. The IRS claims publicly have a bigger non-filer problem now than they had back then. And they admit that they do not have the resources to go after 63 million non-filers. I mean, that doesn't take a genius to figure that one out, right? You know, how would you like to be in charge of 63 million people, try to corral them? You know, 63 million sheep, you know? And the problem is that, you know, they got limited budget. For every $1,000 that they raise, they only spend $5. That's it. Less than half of 1% have a limited budget. So if they go after this guy or that guy too much or spend too much money on him or her, the problem is him and her and him, all these guys are going to get away. They just cannot afford to spend too much on any one person or group of people, can they? Because they have limited resources they got to allocate properly. Only 2% of the money the IRS collects is done because of enforced collection. That's it, just 2%. 98% is paid without any question, any problems, by people who just send it out the money to the government. Okay? So really, it's not like the whole thing is, that's what they call voluntary compliance. They know that they got to have people letting them doing it. So what do? Since they cannot give any one of us personal attention too much, you know, personal visits are very expensive, telephone calls are very expensive, right? And they don't have your phone number. And I tell you, somebody asked me today, hey man, what if I get a call from the IRS? Well, I'll tell you this, a common sense answer was given to me 10 years ago when I started out in the freedom movement. And I was doing speeches. A friend of mine said, oh, Payman, the IRS contacted me actually a few years ago. And it said, and he was not into the freedom stuff at all. He said, I'm agent so-and-so with the IRS, and I want to talk to you. He says, oh, you say you're with the IRS? Yes, I am. Well, how do I know? You could be my neighbor spying on me. Write that down, folks. This is good notes, okay? I'm giving you practical tips. And, oh, well, okay, you're right. You're right. You don't know who I am. Can't verify it. Okay, I'll tell you what. I'll come by and visit you. Oh, okay, fine. The agent comes by, who knows, several days later, and I forgot whether he wasn't home or doesn't answer the door, but the agent leaves a card by the door, crack of the door, and then calls him back a couple days later. Says, hello, I'm agent so-and-so. I came by and left you my card. I said, oh, Well, how do I know that? You could be my neighbor spying on me, right? The neighbor could have seen the card, picked it up, and called him, right? You don't know. So after that, he didn't hear from her. Okay? Iris does not visit people in the home, folks. That's it. People have this fear like, oh, if I don't do what they tell me, they're going to put me in jail right away. They're going to come take my stuff tomorrow. It doesn't work that way. There's a procedures in law that they must follow, okay, before they can do that, folks. Even something as brainless as adding water to your car. If you don't add a water or change your oil in your car, even though it should be done often, right? It's still going to take a while for your car to crash. You can still salvage it even if you change your oil in your car after 20,000 miles. But you're better late than never, right? So there is a long process these guys must follow. Believe it or not, there is an amount of fairness in the law. There is a fairness. The law as written is a fair amount of fairness in it. The problem is you don't know, and I did not know 10 years ago, how it all works. And that's what we try to teach you at Freedom Law School. That's why, you know, this is very much like the, you know, the health situation, you know. People want silver bullet answers to health. And of course, there's a bunch of people peddling pills and supplements, and, you know, you take that, this is a secret of the Mayans that was found out, you know, 1,000 years ago they did that, you'll be healthy. But the bottom line is, even if you don't do things perfectly right about health, okay, if you just do few basic things, I'm going to tell you right now, and I'm sure Dr. Dave will share a lot more, you'll be healthier than 95% of people out there. Don't do drugs, don't do alcohol, don't smoke, stay away from junk food, highly salty food, fried food, you know, all these processed food, eat, you know, fresh fruits and vegetables, at least a large amount of your diet, let it be that, okay? And get some exercise, get some rest, you know, try to live a stress-free life, smile, you know, don't get angry. If you just do all that, you'll be healthier than 95% of people. And you learn about health, what it's like, you know, oh, I got to do all that? I just rather go buy the silver bullet pill. Same thing with the freedom area, okay? Education is the answer. That's why when I started out in 1992 teaching classes, it was really a class for our fellow group to bring them to our level of ignorance, whatever we were about all that stuff. And it eventually developed into this 9-week course called A Practical Road to Freedom from Oppressive Taxation and Control. It ended up being this 24-hour course on audio or CD, answering all the different questions people want and need to know, fully explain it. Because you cannot do it all in 1 hour, okay? So you know these answers, what's going on. Ah, I know why you got to add water to the car, why you got to add oil and change it every so often. Oh, I know why I should take my car and have the spark plugs changed every so often. You know, my 21-year-old sister didn't know nothing about cars. Anything that happened, give it to the mechanic. I don't want to touch it. You can check the water. Oh, I don't want to touch it. Check the oil if it's too low. No, I don't know nothing about it. Feel the same way about the IRS and law on your rights? Yeah, I don't. See, so that's why my initial approach has and still is to educate you as to understand what's going on. Once you understand that, okay, then it's a lot easier, okay? Now, remember I talked about, again, the IRS being a Wizard of Oz, 31 million letters they send out. IRS in 1999 sent out 31 computer-generated letters. Do you have to respond to a computer letter? Is a computer watch? Can a computer watch you? No, it doesn't have eyes. What can a computer do? Send another letter out. Right? Can a computer assess taxes on you? No. A human being at some level in the IRS must get involved in your case, come after you or you until they can do something. The computer cannot on its own go do everything and spit out and enforce and collect. A human element is needed. They don't have the time or resources, okay? So after years of doing this, since 1992 when I started teaching on a kind of part-time, having fun with it, and in 96 going full-time with starting Freedom Law School, I realized that education is definitely the core #1 part, but I also saw that preparation was a good, important part of that. In fact, I learned a lot of that from Free Enterprise Society, to their credit. They've been a #1 source of my, education and helped me get going. Okay, they're really the oldest and most successful freedom law group I've seen around, and preparation is important. Another thing was I found out people want to be able to talk to somebody in case you have questions, right? It's not like, I can't get a hold of these guys. Have you come across this group on internet? They have this wonderful advertising. There's no phone number listed, right? They say, email me. Well, they're hiding behind an email because they don't want to be, spend the time talking to you on the phone, right? So you ask this long question, they give you a one-paragraph answer. You try to decipher that for whatever it's supposed to mean. Okay? You want to be able to talk to somebody, right? Number 3, and lastly, what if you are that one out of whatever number that the IRS does come after, right? Because remember, they can come after very few. Many of you will be left alone. There was a gentleman here this morning who told me, Paymont, who left from Las Vegas. He said, Paymont, I haven't filed since 1979. Everything was fine. Never had a problem. In 92 and 3, 4, I got nervous and I filed a request for extension. And for those years, IRS is writing me letters now. That really, for those years that I requested extension, they're contacting me. Okay? April, could you give me that IRS attack handbook, please? I'll tell you something else I'm going to show you about Wizard of Oz. It's very important. We got the enemy's handbook. Yeah, we got the Nazis' plan. You know what it's called? It's a blue book back there. I've entitled it IRS Attack Plan Exposed. What it is IRS's own manual, training manual for their agents, okay, on how to identify and crucify and nail freedom lovers, freedom fighters, people they label as tax protesters. Thank you. Okay, here it is. You can go to our website and download this for free. Please go to it. Write this down. Our website is www.livefreenow.org, just like it sounds, livefreenow.org. Okay, go under the free information section and you can download the IRS Attack Plan Exposed for free. Please tell the whole world to download it for free, okay? This I got because one of my students was an IRS agent, okay, who loved what I did. He said, Paymont, this is great, and he got this to me, Paymont, look what I got for you. And I thought, whoa, this is cool. So I read this sucker cover to cover, okay, cover to cover. You know what it said? Tell you what. On page 14, one of the most important commentaries, in passing they mention, you read all this stuff. Here's what it says, okay? It says that non-filer schemes, first of all, they said non-filers is anybody who hasn't filed or simply stopped filing. So if you're thinking, I've been filing for 30 years of my life, and if I stop filing, they'll notice me, not necessarily so. Okay, because they don't know of the 63 million what happened. Maybe you died. Maybe you became homeless. Maybe you didn't work that year. They don't know. Why? You didn't file after 30 years you stopped. Okay? So non-filer schemes involve individuals who have never filed an income tax return or have simply stopped filing. So to the IRS, if you never file a return or simply stopped, you're in the same category. You see that? Now, here's the good part. These protesters are the most difficult to identify. What? Why have an identification problem? If I didn't file, they'll notice me. The Wizard of Oz will see me, right? Someone's watching me, and no. They have an identification problem of the 63 million, remember? Right? Because they don't know. Again, are you an illegal alien from Mexico, drug dealer, homeless, bankrupt, living off your saving, vacationing, living off the land, simply never started filing, forgot to file, got behind. Who knows, right? I don't know. These protesters are the most difficult to identify since they do not readily identify themselves. You know how you identify yourself to the IRS as a tax protester? By sending protest letters or unacceptable returns. For years I was involved in the freedom movement, and that's what's out there. That's what I used to learn and teach, is that when the IRS writes to you, you must answer and challenge them every time. Otherwise, if you don't refute them, you owe the money. Wrong. You got this from the devil's mouth. Right there, the wizard is telling you. Okay? You identify yourself readily by answering them. Unless the individual is known to the service, like me, and Joe Bannister, and Bob Schultz, and John Turner, okay? You, two members, one of the 63 million, right? Okay? It is extremely difficult to determine if the taxpayer is an illegal protester. See? They don't want to get illegal aliens from Mexico or homeless. They want to get you, who for constitutional, legal, ethical reasons, okay, are challenging the corruptness and crookedness that the government and the IRS is doing, right? You are the challenge to the system, not the homeless person, not the illegal alien from Mexico, right? You may not be able to identify this taxpayer as a protester until you actually contact them and request their returns. So, the Wizard of Oz, knowing that, sends out over 30 million letters out there en masse. A lot of them are requests for return. And what happens? The typical person in this room I see is Anglo-Saxon white male. Okay? You have, I see women, I see minorities. I'm Jewish from Iran, but basically you got a bunch of white folks here, okay? So you were taught that when someone writes to you a letter, you must respond to them. Aunt Millie or Uncle Joe writes to you. So IRS sends this computer-generated letter, and they very often have the barcoding on them. Okay, you can see bar. You think, and there's no name of an agent, no signature. You think, I'm finished. IRS is gonna get me. What am I gonna do? I better go on internet and search for an answer. Okay, and then you go and find, we IRS busters, and we do this, and then you go, whoa, uppercut the IRS. We got this super letter that just jam them up and default him, and we get a judgment against them. They're foreclosed, and we're out of their jurisdiction. Wow. We canceled our contracts, and you saying to the IRS all the time, hi, I'm one of those tax protesters you want to identify. Hi, here's my identification information. And that's why we've been losing, one of the main reasons in the freedom movement for decades. We haven't known how the beast operates. And that's why you have people that say, Payman, don't get involved with that stuff. You're going to get in trouble. I did that 10 years ago. Or me or my friends got in trouble. Yes, because you didn't do it the right way, perhaps. Have you thought about that? Kind of reminds me of a guy who came to says, I'm not going to ask any more girls out to date. They're all no good. They always say no to me every time. Never. I asked 40 different girls. And I get straight no's. It's a waste of time. Just forget about it. So the wise man goes to the guy and says, well, so what do you tell these girls when you ask them for a date? Well, I just go to the girl and say, hey, you look hot. Let's go to bed. Well, perhaps I can offer you a little bit different alternative way of approaching the girls. You might get better results. You know what I'm saying? That's what we do in the freedom movement. We're naively thinking that the Constitution is the same as it was 200 years ago. We keep quoting the U.S. Supreme Court decisions of 100 years ago, IRS codes and regulations, the Constitution, expect the IRS and the courts to uphold it. That's not the way it works, folks. This is commando warfare. This is war. They have declared war on the American people, folks. The international bankers and the corporations that they own or control, and the politicians they own or control, and the judges and that they own or control, and the people in the executive branch. Okay, they're all kind of going together. They have declared on you and I and the American people. It's treason. It's high treason. The problem is they got the rest of the sovereign American people duped with the boob tube, right? As long as they're happy watching soap opera and sports on the TV, filling out sports stadium rather than these kind of seminars, they get to get away with it. Okay? That's the problem. Okay? So if that's the case, you won't be able to just go and just code them the law. Literally, you have to treat it like a command of warfare. And I tell you, we can win this war for freedom with just that. Because let me tell you, that's how the American Revolution was won. How many of you saw the movie Patriot with Mel Gibson, right? He said, he was looking out the window, he said, of the revolutionary militia fighting the British. It said the battle was determined before it even started. What was he saying? The ragtag militia out there going 1, 2, 3, right? And then the British army coming in 1, 2, 3. They sit down and say, shoot, right? Of course, the British army was bigger, better dressed, better trained, better fed, better organized, right? They decimated the American militia. So Mel Gibson said, I don't think that's the way to do it. Let's go form small groups and ambush them at night when they sleep and retreat, that type of thing, right? And that's how we won the war. That's how the Vietnamese beat us in Vietnam. Okay? We had superior firepower, and we lost in Vietnam. The English army had superior firepower, yet they lost the revolution to American people. And we can do the same thing. What we have to do, we have to learn how to beat them at their own game. There is no alternative. And if you want to think about armed revolution, some people say, oh, well, you got to go pick up arms. You're just going to get yourself killed. Okay? Don't even think about it, because then there's not enough people to do that. So the only realistic option we got is to use their own rules, use their own court cases against them. And let me tell you, the good news is there's plenty there to beat them at it. You just heard from Paul Ballmer. For years, okay, nobody was able to beat FTB. Nobody. Okay? And Paul approached me and says, Payman, I'm working with the IPA information. And I said, so am I. Interesting. I said, you know, let's work together on it. Because we had the same ideas. And sure enough, he showed that you can even beat the FTB, which is worse than the IRS. Okay? The problem is most of these engineers that have really done the work, the bookworms, the legal minds, okay, in the freedom movement, okay, they are terrible salesmen. They don't know how to sell a steak. But the people on the internet that sell a good sizzle, yeah, we got them, you know. Yeah, you could do this, you'd be out there after their jurisdictional system to sell the sizzle, but they know steak. Whereas the people who really know what they're doing, I'm going to give you on point. How many heard about Vern Holland? Yeah, very few hands. How many heard about Sean O'Connor? A few more. How many heard about Bill Conklin? Very few hands. Oh, more hands. How many heard about Ed Bruning? Yeah. Dave Wellington. How many of you heard about Paul Ballmer 3 years ago? 3 years ago, before he won his case. Yeah. See what I'm saying? These guys that are really great at what they're doing, you saw how soft-spoken Paul Ballmer was? You know? You think he's not a salesman, he's an engineer. That's his background, you know? So what I found out in the freedom movement is that the guys that really know their stuff typically are pretty, you know, they are known. They do good work here and there. So one of the things I did is when I found these guys, I said, let me be your student, please. And they did. They're happy to have students. And eventually, about a year ago, I started organizing these guys, ask them, look, can you work through Freedom Law School? How about if I refer cases to you? Can it be part of a sort of a dream team of the freedom movement? You know? How about, like people like Ed Bruning, Robert Clarkson, Paul Ballmer, Dave Wellington, others. Folks, I got a client, for example, right now. We're doing suing the IRS for a refund of over $1 million they took from me illegally. And former IRS agent Joe Bannister is working on that case with me. So is John Turner, you heard about, the former IRS agent you heard yesterday. So is Ed Bruning. And one of the best freedom attorneys in the freedom movement we're going to bring in the works about a year from now when it's time to get an attorney. Okay? It takes a team's approach sometimes. But you haven't heard about, now you heard about Joe Bannister and these guys because we're a former IRS agent. But a lot of these guys you don't know about. So I hope you get to see the vision that I have of putting something together, okay, that is a complete approach to freedom. Okay? Education, preparation, right? Support, and representation when needed and appropriate, right? With that now, we have something where you can go on and live your life, do whatever you do, okay, and know that this part will be taken care of. Okay, just another part of your life. Okay, well, that's what I put together about a year ago. Okay, if you got our catalog of Freedom Law School, could you get some of them? If you guys want to follow along, we have it. Kevin, you have the catalog of Freedom Law School, bring it out there. If you don't have it, you can raise your hand and I'll get it to you. Okay, but we put together on page 10 of the catalog what we call the Royal Freedom Package. Okay, and essentially what that program is involved is, number one, education, right? Which is the course I showed you and other material. If you want to raise your hand, leave, and he'll give you the catalog if you want to follow along. Okay. But the second part is preparation. Who makes the law in America, folks? Which branch of government makes the law, supposedly? Legislature. Right. You know what happens if you ask the IRS about legality or illegality of income tax? You know what they do? They say, we only administer the law. We don't make the law. Go talk to the Congress. They make the law. Really? And they're right. So guess what? We do exactly that at Freedom Law School. We write through the legislature, the congressmen and senators, okay? Remember, all these guys took an oath, right? Just like Bush. You see Bush's picture on the top cover of the paper? Here's good old George Bush putting his hand on the Bible before his family and the nation and Supreme Court Justice, saying, I swear to uphold and defend the Constitution from all enemies, foreign and domestic. Right? Then he goes the next day and breaks it on a regular basis, right? They all do that, all these treasonous people, okay? And you need to confront them about that. Okay? Now, what's the way to confront them about it? Well, the best way I found about it is if someone's already, my way is don't reinvent the wheel. Learn from a school of prior knowledge. So the most powerful information I found out is, number one, Joe Bannister. Remember, Joe is my student. He learned from Freedom Law School. He took the level 1 course I showed you, okay? And how to use the law library and things like that. He wrote his report, and I helped edit it for him, and then I published it for him, and he put it out, and we put it out there. And I tell you what I did, I figured, you know, I'm going to go to my congressmen and senators. Look, guy, an IRS agent's coming out showing the income tax is a scam. Why don't you show where this is wrong and start getting this beast, the IRS, off of people's backs? So I send this book by certified, return receipt requested, to my congressman, Christopher Cox from this area, and Diane Frankenstein and Barbara Boxer. And they all ignored me. Well, Boxer sent me a one-line letter. Thank you. It was nice to hear from our constituents letter. That's it. They ignore you because they can't answer this stuff. So when my congressman had a local event going on, I went in there, listened, you know, at the very end of the whole thing, when everybody waited in line, I saw him again. I said, here, Christopher Cox, here's another copy. Okay, you used to teach at Harvard income tax constitutional law. Yes, we did. He's a lawyer. You know, I talked about this and about 16th Amendment not being ratified, the whole income tax thing. I said, please review this and get back to me, you know. He ignored it again. Why? Because he can't answer it. He doesn't know the law. The lawmakers themselves don't know the law. Isn't that crazy? All they are a bunch of popular people, right? The elections are just a popularity contest, right? Which one's the nicer guy than the other one, or lesser or too evil. So, well, what happened is that after that, you know, then Joe Bannister, so what we do, we send that to our congressmen, senators, but we don't stop there. We send a video of Joe Bannister's speech to a congressman because, you know what, if they ever take you to a jury, this book of Bannister and his whole story and that video can go before the jury, will go before the jury as to why you stopped filing and paying income tax. Okay? And then on top of that, the material from We the People Foundation. Okay? Folks, We the People Foundation did a great job exposing the scam of income tax. Full-page ads in US Today, 4 of them. Okay? They're cheap. Okay? All of them for $1, all 4 for $1. Send it out to them. Like, educate your public servants, right? And when you do this kind of work, when you send all this stuff to them, they cannot refute you. You have a record that in a case, rare chance they're after you criminally, you have a solid defense to take to jury. Okay? But what we do at Freedom Law School is that in case they do come after you, if they're foolish enough to come after you, we will pay for all the attorney's costs, all the paralegals' costs, court costs for trial, pre-trial, appeal, all the way up to the Supreme Court. Just the trial of a tax case, you know how much that costs? Average, between $50,000 to $100,000 or more. Yeah. But we can cover that for people, that peace of mind, by coming together. So, and that's what in the program I'm talking about, called the Royal Freedom Package and the Simple Freedom Package. Both have that criminal defense fund. The Freedom Press Society, by the way, has that too. So if you're a member of theirs, you don't have to become a member of ours if you don't want to. That's fine, because it's basically the same idea. But what we had done on top of that is an area where most people want and need the most help. Because then let me tell you, again, they come after very, very few people criminally. Very few people. Remember the numbers? About 2,200 people they come after to put them in jail. And of the 2,200, about 220 are non-filers. The rest, about 2,000, are filers, right? Remember that? Showed the flyers to you yesterday? So most people, they want to come after you to try to take your bank account or paycheck, home, or other assets, or stocks, or that type of thing, okay? That's where you want and need the protection, right? So what we have done at Freedom Law School is that with our program, any letters that are written by the IRS, any contact with them, you contact us immediately. Okay, just like preventative maintenance for your car. Okay, we want that your car, we're going to give you a Mercedes-Benz, brand new, state-of-the-art Mercedes-Benz with instructions on how to use it properly. Any problems, any questions, call us. You get a manual in there on how to operate it properly, what's going on. Okay, that tells you so you know how this thing works. But if you have any questions, any problem, any sound, bring it in. Let us check it out. Okay. So if it's nothing, it's nothing. But if it is something, we'll fix it right away. Because you know why? And you know why I want it fixed right away? Because you've got me on a bind. The program is designed that be affordable for people. And that is you pay only a fixed cost for that maintenance contract. Okay? $2,000 a year after the first year being $6,000. So anything that happens, we'll do that. That means that if they want to audit you, summon you, send you proposed tax letters, if you have to even go to tax court, you don't have to pay an attorney or CPA $100 or $200 per hour or more. All that is taken care of by us as Freedom Law School. We will get the appropriate professional to handle your case and represent you, if necessary, even go to tax court or otherwise. Okay, that's what you're doing. So, so pay them out for $2,000 a year. You sure you can do that? Yes, I can. You know why? Because the burden of proof is on the IRS when it comes to non-filers. That's a big secret. That's right. When you haven't filed anything, the computer shows zero about you. If the IRS claims you made $50,000 or $50 million last year, it makes no difference. The burden of proof is on them because they're proposing the numbers. Makes sense, right? Can you prove to me you did not make $500,000 last year, any of you? Can you prove that to me? No, you cannot prove a negative. So burden of proof is on them. But you see, you didn't know that. I didn't know that years ago. That's how the Wizard of Oz operates. That's why they try to get you, sucker you to file on your own. Okay? And there's no way I could do this program for filers. I urge you, if you're to contact, go open up your phone book, contact some HR on Block, contact some tax attorneys out there. Say, look, do you have a program where I could pay you $5,000 or $10,000 a year? You do everything for me with the IRS. Any letters, hearings, meetings, you do it all, and protect me all the way if they want to come after me for money. Protect me all the way if they want to put me into jail. You take care of it all for me. CPAs, tax attorneys, professionals, you do it all for me for a fixed amount. $5,000 a year, $10,000 a year. Please, open up the phone book when you go home. Call. They'll tell you there ain't no such thing at any price, sir. IRS is a big beast that they can do whatever they want. Who knows how much we might have to end up spending on your case. Hundreds of thousands. There's no way we can just for $5,000 or $10,000 a year take care of everything for you. Because you put the burden of proof on yourself. They deceived you. into signing that confession form. And so you say, Master, I need some of that deduction, please. I bring the canceled checks and receipts. Yes, yes, I'll bring it. And I bring, yes, come on down, Joe. Did we have a legitimate business lunch deduction? We discussed business at lunch, right? See, I can prove everything, Master. They deceived you into enslaving yourself. But once you take the step to be free by doing nothing to start out with on April 15th, right? Then, now what you need, so what you do, we're going to get educated and supported, prepared, and represented. Now, the more people we get in there, folks, the easier it's going to get for us. Okay, well, the program's already going well. Okay, it's been only a year. In fact, how many people in this room got a rural funeral package? Can I see show of hands? Okay, we got a few people. Yeah, 4 people. We got people working for government and private enterprise, even, having the program. Okay, so the idea is that if they come after you, guess what? We got the money of these other guys to spend on your case. If they come after you, then they got the money. We got the money of these guys. You see, we're supporting each other. That's how we can do it affordably. Okay, so and I tell you, it's now people say, "Oh, that's expensive for me." Well, folks, listen, you can start with level 1 course for $300 by itself. That's like a basic Chevy to get you from point A to B. Get started with the education process. And I gave you the Royal funeral package, the Rolls Royce of it all. Okay, we have everything in between that fits your budget. But I tell you what, if you say, well, Paymon, I really want to have that Royal funeral package too, but I don't have the money. Well, I'll tell you what, do what I did. I worked hard. I busted my butt. When I heard about this stuff 10 years ago, I borrowed money to get the untaxing package back then this group erroneously sold me. And I started talking to other people about it. Okay, where's the spirit of enterprise in America? People don't want to work anymore, even in the freedom movement. You know? Oh, I want it for free. Well, go talk to people. Nothing's going to come for free to you. So we got a program where you can get paid up to $3,000 per person that you refer that gets the Royal funeral package. That's with no W-2s or W-4s or 1099 snitch forms. No slave surveillance number issues to give to your employer. In fact, you get paid first of $6,000, pay us the remaining $3,000. That's why the first year is more. To give it to the club, you're going to get a good, healthy referral fee. I know many of you live with $3,000 a month net after taxes in this room, don't you, or less? One a month. With one a week, that's $13,000 a month, cash. Okay? So the opportunity is there, folks. This program is very new. It's at the beginning of it. So what we're looking for in America, folks, is dynamic people. If you're not dynamic, no problem. We'll help you become one. I was not a good speaker when I started out. I learned. I improved myself. Okay? Self-improvement is part of life. I'm going on the Freedom Drive in Washington, D.C. with Bob Schultz. I'm going to be driving several days. I'm going to take all my self-improvement tapes. I'm going to be listening. How to make myself a better person. Okay? I'm going to be finishing Dr. Lorraine's Day's tapes, which I started out recently. Okay? And you want to get someplace? You can. But where does it start? With you. You got to decide that you want to be the best that you can be. And you're going to do what it takes. Okay? If you commit to yourself to be the best you can be, you can do it, folks. There's no reason why you cannot all be where I am. I'm a foreigner who became American. You are native. You have every advantage over me. By being here, you have your friends, relatives being here for a long time. So what I invite you to do is to look inside yourself and decide which way you want to live. Slave or free. Because there is no middle ground. Okay? As much as possible, try to be as free or slave. Because you got to pay a price for slavery. Yes, Master. I filled that 1040 confession form. I bring my checks and receipts. Yes, Master. I got my CPA tax attorney. I'm paying them $200 an hour to help me with all this stuff, you know? You could do that. That's your choice. It's a choice. Or remain free. Hey, guys, let's get together. Let's support each other. Let's educate each other. Okay? Let's do something about it. I don't want to just become a sheep in a new world order. I want to be one of the free ones. And with internet and mail Okay? In this days, internet, email, we can do that, folks. You could be free. Your next door neighbor is a slave. So whatever choice you make, I hope you make the best choice for yourself. And I invite you to consider your choice to be freedom. Thank you.